Hello everyone, these are the Introduction to Evolution notes, the first notes for Unit 9, which is Natural Selection. Let's talk a little bit about the pacing for Unit 9. We're going to start today with an introduction where we talk about what evolution is, and some things like artificial selection and antibiotic resistance that will help introduce it and make it a little more relevant to you. Then we'll continue tomorrow, or whenever you do this next, with natural selection, what affects evolution, what is the evidence, what this means for the origin of life, misconceptions about evolution, because there's going to be a lot of those, and then we'll finish with a quiz. So what is evolution? In basic terms, it could just mean a change in something over time. But in more biological terms, it means a change in the inheritable traits, the ones you can inherit, across populations. So not just one organism, but a bunch of them of the same species. There's actually two types of evolution. There's microevolution, which are smaller changes in the traits and the genes. And then there's macroevolution, which is much larger changes that create new species and diversity. So how we got dogs from wolves, those are all the same species. Those changes are pretty small in the context of things. So that would be microevolution. But macroevolution would help explain the common descent of all organisms and how things like birds could have evolved from dinosaurs. So evolution is a conclusion based on a wide body of evidence. That's what makes it a theory. So that's not a law or a hypothesis. And it's not just a theory either, because it's not the kind of theory that you would use in just common language, that you have theory about something. This is a scientific theory which requires lots of evidence and studies and papers. It is not a belief. You do not have to believe in evolution. Again, it is a conclusion based on evidence. And it is widely accepted in the scientific community. It is used in medicine, and so much about biology and life sciences makes more sense when you look at it in terms of evolution. So artificial selection will help us frame how this stuff works. It's also called selective breeding. So if you remember in genetics, we have traits that are controlled or at least influenced by the DNA. And DNA is inherited. Through sexual reproduction, genomes of that DNA mix. They create new variations of traits. And even with the genetically modified organisms that we can make, we make them by modifying that DNA to make the traits that we want. And even if we can't do that specific to the DNA in the cells, we can do it by just selectively picking which plants or animals we want to breed together to get the kind of traits that we want. For instance, with a wolf. So the wolf is the common ancestor of all dogs. By picking different wolves, people were able to breed the wolves to make the kinds of dogs that they wanted. And by further doing that with dogs, by picking the dogs that you want, you can create new traits or new breeds of dogs that have the traits that you want. So by picking traits over time, we are selectively forming the traits and the organism that we want. We've been doing this with corn too. Corn was just this grain on grass before, and we have bred it to be this sugary giant crop monster that is delicious when grilled and delicious with butter. Another way to make this more relevant and connective is antibiotic resistance, which is very relevant with the disease right now. So antibiotics are medicines used to treat bacterial infections. So when bacteria was growing on a petri dish, people discovered that fungus growing in that same dish would kill the bacteria. So we were able to medicinize this fungi here into pill form that you could take to kill bacterial infections in your own body. So the first step of antibiotic resistance, how do they resist the drugs that we're giving them? First, you have lots of bacteria, and whatever group of bacteria that you have, let's say you have MRSA infection or strep throat, you've got lots of those bacteria in your body. They're going to be different. There always exists variation within any population. The antibiotic medicine is going to kill most of those bacteria. A few of them are going to be more resistant to this medicine, and they won't die right away. You're also going to kill lots of your own bacteria in your gut and your body, which is going to prevent you from further fighting infections. So now this drug-resistant bacteria that survived can now reproduce because it's not competing with all the others, and it's going to grow and take over that same area. So now you have lots of very resistant bacteria that are living in your body. Some of them won't be as resistant, but a lot of them will have that trait that got passed down from these survivors. And to top it off, bacteria can also exchange these genes with other bacteria. It's called horizontal gene transfer, where they give genes to other bacteria that they're around. Which is pretty weird. So, some bacteria are resistant. You kill off a lot of them. The resistant ones survive, and they stick around, and they continue to reproduce and make more of these resistant bacteria. The same thing can happen with viruses. That is the reason why every year you get the seasonal flu vaccines, because the virus changes all the time. Tiny mutations, tiny variations in the virus occur all the time. So we have to keep up with what those changes are and what the most common versions of those flu viruses will be. We've also studied a lot about HIV, and HIV likely came from a chimpanzee, and they have a very similar virus called SIV, which is simian immunovirus. HIV is human immunovirus. And we can map out the genetic similarities between variations of HIV and SIV and link them together to find out what the common ancestor would be, so we can see how this virus has changed over time. But in all of this, there's a few major things. We can call it this. There's always variation. So there's always a variety of traits within any given species. The traits that we're concerned about are the ones that are inherited. So traits are determined by DNA and can be passed down to offspring. There's always going to be a selection process. So there's going to be some individuals, like those resistant bacteria, that have more favorable traits and are selected to reproduce. There are some dogs that have better traits that we want, so we'll pick them to breed together and pass down those traits to the new dogs. And there's time. None of this happens very quickly. All of this needs many generations and a lot of time to work. So there's going to be some practice questions here. This is from your warm-ups. The next lesson is going to be about natural selection. So artificial selection is how we got the dogs and farm animals and farm crops. Humans selected those traits to get passed down. In natural selection, nature, the survival in the ecosystem, is going to be shaping how this selection process happens. So some animals are going to survive and pass down their traits, and some animals won't, and they'll become extinct. All natural organisms go through this process. So they're going to experience that same VIST, and it's going to cause different frequencies. More traits, some traits are going to be more common than others. And there's going to be some practice questions here for you guys to do, and that'll be it. I hope that was helpful.